A wealthy socialite invites her maid son to play chess, thinking it'll be a harmless joke. She had no idea she was challenging a prodigy. "Come here, boy," Victoria Sterling's voice rang through the opulent living room of her Beverly Hills mansion. "Show us how you play chess in the slums." She said it with the smugness of someone who's never earned a thing in her life. 17-year-old Diego Ramirez had been helping his mother, Carmen Reyes, serve hors d'oeuvres during a charity dinner when the evening took a turn. Victoria, host of the night's gala, supposedly in support of underprivileged youth, had decided to turn the maid's son into live entertainment. Around the room, guests, businessmen, politicians, and their bejeweled spouses sipped champagne and chuckled behind crystal glasses. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. Fundraising for poor kids while making one of them pass trays in her mansion? Delightful. "I bet he can at least move the pieces," she added, gesturing toward the elegant Italian marble chessboard displayed like a relic on her coffee table. "Let's see how he does against someone who's actually studied the game." Her husband, Arthur Sterling, whispered with a smirk, "I'd be surprised if he even knows knights move in L shapes." Laughter rippled through the room like a tide of condescension. Carmen clenched her tray. 20 years of scrubbing that house, raising her son on a maid's wage, and now she had to watch her employer mock him for sport. She'd known Victoria since the woman was young, watching her grow from a pampered brat into a cold, calculating elite. "Carmen, stop serving for a bit," Victoria said sweetly. "I want you to see your boy play. Might be a learning experience for both of you." But Diego didn't move. He stood silent, observing not just the board, but every person in that room. At 17, he had learned that silence speaks volumes, and what he saw was a gathering of people who had no idea who they were dealing with. Something in his stillness made a few guests stop chuckling. There was a sharpness to him, a focused calm. His fingers moved slightly, as if calculating on a board only he could see. "Of course, Mrs. Sterling," he said coolly. "It would be my honor." Victoria reclined into her armchair, wearing the grin of a queen about to watch a gladiator show. "Excellent. Bet you've never played on something like this before. Real Italian marble. Each piece worth more than, well, you know." From across the room, Representative Jennifer Morales raised an eyebrow. "Victoria, isn't this a bit cruel? You're setting the poor boy up to be embarrassed." "Nonsense," Victoria scoffed, adjusting her diamond earrings. "It'll be a fun story for him. I played chess in a real mansion." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Diego had spent the last 8 years obsessing over chess. While other kids played video games, he devoured strategy books from the public library. He watched historic matches on a second-hand computer he repaired himself. While his mother cleaned homes overnight, he stayed up studying Kasparov, Fischer, Carlsen. He had memorized over 200 openings and could recite 50 legendary defenses by heart. And Victoria? She was about to be blindsided by the very boy she had mocked out of sheer prejudice. As she arranged the pieces with exaggerated flair, Diego's eyes flicked to each face in the room. He wasn't just prepping for a game. He was preparing to dismantle their assumptions, piece by piece. If stories like this speak to you about prejudice and overcoming the odds, don't forget to subscribe. Because what happened next proved that judging someone by their background can be the costliest mistake of all. Victoria took white naturally. "I always play white," she said airily. "Family tradition." She ignored the fact that in competitive chess, color is chosen randomly. Diego said nothing. He placed his black pieces with a precision that made Arthur Sterling squint, each one centered perfectly, aligned like it had been done 1,000 times before. "Let's spice things up," Victoria announced. "If he manages to even make me nervous, I'll donate $1,000 to, I don't know, a public school or something." More laughter. But Diego looked up and smiled, not the kind that reached his eyes. Carmen froze. She knew that smile. It was the same one he wore as a boy when teachers underestimated him. The same one he had at 12 when he told her he didn't need help with math anymore. Victoria opened with E4. "King's pawn," she said. "A classic opening. We learned it at Harvard." Diego replied instantly, "C5, the Sicilian defense." The room went quiet. That wasn't a move someone makes just to shuffle pieces around. That was the choice of someone who knew the game. "Interesting," murmured Rep. Morales, now leaning forward. Victoria hesitated, 3 seconds too long. Diego knew right then she'd memorized a few lines, maybe 6, but didn't grasp the principles behind them. She followed with NF3, standard, predictable, learned at some garden party or club, no doubt. And as she planned her next move, Diego drifted back to when he was 9, when he pulled a torn chess book from the library trash, when he tucked it into his backpack and begged his exhausted mother to teach him the basics. "Mijo, why chess?" she had asked, after scrubbing floors all day. "Because the rich kids say it's how they prove they're smarter." Back then, Carmen Reyes earned just $600 a month, barely enough for rent, let alone lessons, a computer, or any kind of luxury. But what they did have was the public library, and that quiet haven quickly became Diego's second home. Every day after school, he walked 3 kilometers to that building filled with dusty books that no one else touched. He buried himself in the lives of grandmasters, tracing their steps move by move, game by game, until he could hear their strategies in his sleep. Meanwhile, in the Sterling mansion, Victoria finally played her next move. D3, a cautious choice. Predictable. It exposed more than her chess style. It revealed her personality. She craved safe spaces, familiar positions, games where social hierarchy could guarantee a win. Diego countered with NC6, precise, deliberate, executed in under 5 seconds. Every move from him seemed pre-programmed, as if he'd memorized the script years ago and was simply playing out what he already knew. "Our little prodigy is playing too fast," Victoria chuckled to her guests. "In real chess, dear, you think before you move." It was then that Diego made a masterful psychological play. He paused, acted like he was pondering something deep. 15 full seconds. Then with what looked like hesitation, he pushed G6, setting up a fianchetto. To any amateur, it looked like a beginner's fumble. But in truth, it was the start of a 10-move-long trap. "Aha!" Victoria turned triumphantly to the room. "See? He lacks patience. Typical." But Arthur Sterling, her husband, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. A former university chess player, he saw something she didn't. "Victoria, he's setting up a fast dragon." "A what?" she snapped, annoyed at the interruption. "It's a variation of the Sicilian defense. Quite advanced." Victoria brushed it off, but the tension in her shoulders told a different story. "Please, he probably saw it in a movie." Yet as the game advanced, unease began to settle over the room. Diego wasn't just reacting to her. He was setting the rhythm, guiding the flow. Each piece he placed seemed to fall into perfect harmony with the others, like notes in a symphony only he could hear. From her corner, Carmen watched, heart pounding. She knew her son was brilliant, but she had never seen him face someone who truly believed they were untouchable. And for the first time in 2 decades of working in that house, she saw it. Fear in Victoria Sterling's eyes. Every subtle insult Victoria lobbed, every attempt to diminish him, only added fuel to Diego's fire. What she didn't know was that every smirk, every scoff, was just another step closer to signing her own defeat. Etched into the 64 squares of that board, now transforming into the stage for one of the greatest social humiliations Beverly Hills had ever seen. Then came Diego's 10th move, a pawn sacrifice, simple on the surface, seemingly innocent, but Arthur Sterling sat up so fast he nearly spilled his drink. Any real player could see it. It was a trap, deadly, unavoidable. "Victoria," he whispered, alarmed, "this boy, he's no amateur." She waved him off, too determined to maintain the illusion of control. "Relax, darling. He probably memorized some flashy sequence off YouTube. I'll finish this in 5 minutes." But then Diego did something unexpected. He stood up, calmly walked to the corner of the room where his mother stood with her hands tightly clasped. "Mom," he said, his voice low but steady, echoing in the tense silence. "Remember when you told me one day I'd show them who we really are?" Carmen nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Of course she remembered. It was his 15th birthday, and she hadn't even been able to afford a cake. He'd found her crying quietly in their cramped kitchen and made her a promise that he would change their lives. "That boy," murmured Congresswoman Morales to her husband, watching the exchange unfold, "has more grace than everyone here combined." Victoria tapped her nails against the table. "Can we get on with it? I have other matters to attend to." Diego returned to the board, but something had shifted. He no longer looked like a teenager pulled into a rich woman's joke. Now he stood as a man who had studied in silence, trained in shadows, and carried the weight of sacrifice and resolve on his back. His 11th move was cold and precise, a dual threat. If Victoria defended her king, she'd lose her queen. If she saved the queen, she'd be checkmated in 3 turns. That, that can't be right, she stammered, scanning the board, really studying it for the first time. Panic crept into her voice. Arthur shook his head slowly. Victoria, you're being outplayed by a kid who's probably never set foot in a formal chess club. Around the room, the shift was palpable. Morales had put her champagne down. The billionaire hotelier had forgotten his phone. Even Arthur's wife had set aside her fashion magazine to watch. All eyes were on the board and on the boy rewriting the evening's narrative. Carmen knew that look on Diego's face. It was the same one he wore at 12 when he discovered the chess section in the library. The same one he had at dawn, hunched over a broken laptop, solving tactics before school. The same look that said, I'm ready. Finally, Victoria moved, an act of desperation. She had walked right into the trap. Diego, already 6 moves ahead, responded without emotion. Check, he said, placing his queen where 3 winning continuations now stared her in the face. The silence that followed was total. Victoria looked at the board, then at Diego, then back again. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from fury. This wasn't just a loss. It was a dismantling of everything she thought she understood about status, worth, and power. You must have copied that from somewhere, she said sharply, her voice rising. No one learns that on their own. Diego smiled, for the first time since the match began. You're right, ma'am, he replied softly. I learned it from Garry Kasparov. Kasparov taught you? Arthur Sterling asked, disbelief etched across his face. Not directly, Diego said as he gently moved his piece into what was clearly the final position. But I studied every one of his documented games, 1,132 to be exact. This sequence? He used it against Karpov, World Championship, 1984, Game 23. Victoria's eyes darted around the room, scanning the guests' faces for the validation she was used to receiving. But instead of admiration or polite applause, what met her gaze was something entirely foreign. Disapproval, quiet but unmistakable. For the first time in her life, the room wasn't with her. And then Carmen Reyes stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake, it rang out steady and sure. My son woke up every morning at 5 to study before school. He walked 6 miles to the library because we couldn't afford internet. When I worked double shifts, he stayed up solving chess problems by candlelight because we didn't have electricity. The room froze. The silence was no longer just respectful, it was reverent. Diego turned to look at his mother, a quiet warmth in his eyes, a kind of love that needed no words. Then, returning to the board, he placed his queen with a soft but firm whisper. Checkmate. Victoria stared at the board like the pieces might change positions on their own if she looked hard enough. When she finally raised her eyes to meet Diego's, there was no more arrogance in the air. Just a sharp, jarring awareness that everything had shifted. The guests no longer saw Diego as a novelty. They saw him as a symbol of talent unrecognized, of worth long overlooked. And as for Victoria, they looked at her now not with admiration or envy, but with something she'd never faced before: disappointment. What she didn't yet understand was that her defeat on that board was just the opening move in a much bigger game, one where the rules of status, power, and respect would be rewritten. And the boy she tried to humiliate would become the one to teach them all what real dignity looked like. Victoria lingered over the fallen king, her hand trembling as if she might somehow undo the finality of the moment. You could hear the tick of the $15,000 wall clock as the room held its breath. That was luck, she muttered, her voice brittle. He must have memorized that sequence. Hamilton stood and stepped toward the board, shaking his head. Victoria, that boy just pulled off a variation of the Sicilian defense I've never even seen, and I've been playing for 40 years. Across the room, Congresswoman Morales lifted her phone and began filming. She knew a viral moment when she saw one. A millionaire exposed, a prodigy revealed, and an entire room silently flipping its loyalties. I don't accept that, Victoria snapped, rising abruptly and knocking over several pieces. Something's wrong. This was set up. Someone trained him just to humiliate me. Diego remained seated, still composed. Would you like a rematch? He asked calmly. I can play with anyone here. Or all of them at once if that's easier for you. A nervous ripple ran through the crowd. It sounded outrageous. But after what they'd just seen, no one laughed. You're being arrogant now, Victoria spat. Her face had gone crimson with rage. A boy from the slums doesn't talk to his betters like that. That's when Carmen stepped forward again. But this time, she didn't look away. For the first time in 20 years, she met Victoria Sterling's eyes, unwavering. My son is not from the slums, she said. We're a working-class family, and he's not being arrogant. He's being honest about what he's capable of, which is more than I can say for you. The tension in the room tightened like a wire. Guests exchanged glances, some uneasy, others fully aware that this was no longer just a chess match. It was a reckoning. How dare you speak to me like that? What? A minute at all, Victoria hissed. Have you forgotten your place? No, Carmen replied with quiet dignity. I remembered my worth. Arthur Sterling stepped in then, his discomfort clear. Victoria, maybe we should just acknowledge the young man's talent. But Victoria laughed, bitter and breathless. You don't get it. This was staged. Someone trained him to humiliate me, in my own home. Diego finally stood, not with defiance but with quiet strength. And when he spoke, his words carried a weight that silenced the entire room. Mrs. Whitman, you want the truth? No one trained me to humiliate you. I've spent the last 8 years studying chess because I dreamed of facing people who respected the game, people who understood that talent doesn't come with a price tag, a pedigree, or a last name. He looked at each face one by one. When you asked me how I play in the slums, I thought you were giving me a chance, a fair chance. But now I see, you never wanted a match. You wanted a spectacle, a punching bag, a joke. Congresswoman Morales had stopped recording, but her eyes remained locked on the scene, visibly moved. How old are you, son? She asked. 17, Diego replied. And how long have you been playing seriously? 8 years. Hamilton turned to Victoria, disbelief heavy in his voice. You just got outplayed by a self-taught teenager, a kid whose family you employ, a kid you invited to play, to mock him. Victoria felt it then, the weight of every gaze in that room. For the first time, those eyes didn't see her wealth or her status. They saw her smallness. I didn't know he was serious, she mumbled, but even she didn't believe her own words. That's not the point, Hamilton shot back. The point is, you assumed he'd be easy to beat, because he's your maid's son, because he's black, because he doesn't have money. The silence was final, absolute. Diego began resetting the pieces on the board. Each one returned to its place with precision and care. Thank you for the game, Mrs. Sterling, he said with quiet grace. It was educational. Then he turned to his mother. Mom, can we go? I've got school in the morning. Carmen nodded, removing the apron she had worn all night to serve the very people now too ashamed to look her in the eye. But before they left, she turned one last time to Victoria. Thank you, she said. You've shown me tonight that my son belongs in much better rooms than this. As mother and son walked toward the door, Congresswoman Morales called out, Diego, are you interested in scholarships? I know a few universities that would be lucky to have someone like you. Diego paused, turned, and offered his first real smile of the night. Very interested, ma'am. Mills slipped him her card and said softly, Call me Monday. Victoria stood frozen, unable to process how quickly she had lost control. Less than an hour ago, she was the admired hostess of a glittering charity evening. Now she was simply the woman who had tried to humiliate a prodigy and failed, in front of witnesses who mattered. As the door closed behind Diego and Carmen, silence gripped the room. The guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure of what to say. Hamilton was the first to break it. I think I'll head out too. One by one, the rest followed, offering nothing more than cold goodbyes and veiled expressions of quiet judgment. Victoria remained standing alone, staring at the chessboard where a teenage boy had dismantled Not just her position, but her pride. What she couldn't yet realize was that tonight wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. A first move in a much greater match. One where Diego Ramirez wouldn't just change his own life, but challenge the very rules of the game people like Victoria Sterling had always played by. As Diego and his mother walked home under the soft glow of the Beverly Hills stars, he kept a business card tucked safely in his pocket, a card that would open a new world. And in his mind, he wasn't thinking about the game he had just won, but the one he was about to play. The game of rewriting what success and respect really look like. 6 months later, Diego Ramirez walked through the corridors of Stanford University on a full scholarship to study engineering. Congresswoman Morales had kept her promise, connecting him with opportunities, mentors, in a world that didn't care where he came from, only what he could do. The story of that night hadn't stayed behind closed doors. It exploded online. 3 million views in 2 weeks. Not because someone secretly recorded the match, but because Morales herself shared the story. The headline read, "Young Chess Prodigy Silences Prejudice at Beverly Hills Gala." The comments poured in. "That boy deserves everything." What a shame for that woman. Victoria's name had become infamous. Her golf club rescinded her membership under pressure. 3 charities removed her from upcoming events. Even Hamilton, a friend for decades, stopped inviting her to social gatherings. "Victoria's always been arrogant," Arthur Sterling's wife was overheard saying at a Malibu dinner. "But humiliating a child in front of everyone? That's cruelty, not class." The most painful part for Victoria wasn't the backlash. It was realizing Diego had never sought to expose or shame her. He had only played chess. That was his truth. Her downfall wasn't orchestrated by him. It was authored by her own assumptions. Carmen Reyes, meanwhile, had been promoted to cleaning supervisor at a luxury hotel in Santa Monica. Triple the salary, full benefits, not charity, recognition, respect for the excellence she'd always brought to her work, now finally seen. Diego didn't stop there. He launched a free online chess platform that matched underserved kids with college mentors. In just half a year, over 1,200 students were learning not just chess, but resilience, patience, foresight, and the kind of strategic thinking no school curriculum could teach. Chess taught me that every person has unique strategic value, Diego explained in a CNN interview. Victoria Sterling taught me that some people need to lose everything before they understand what really matters. When asked if he held a grudge, Diego gave the same calm smile he wore that night. "Grudges? They're just pieces that slow down the game. I'd rather focus on what I can build." Victoria watched that interview alone in her mansion, now emptier than ever. Not just of guests, but of illusions. For the first time, she understood what she had truly lost. Not a chess match, but a chance to be better. Hamilton had called her once after it all unfolded. His voice was brief, firm. "Victoria, you created that moment." Diego just responded with the kind of class you should have shown from the beginning. And that truth echoed far beyond Beverly Hills. Because Diego proved that nobility isn't inherited, it's earned. Not with money or names, but through character forged in hardship and defined by how you treat others when you hold the advantage. He turned prejudice into purpose, used humiliation as fuel for growth. Today, when Diego looks ahead, he doesn't see limits imposed by society. He sees doors ready to be opened by his determination. Victoria had tried to shrink him, hoping his light would make hers shine brighter. But instead, she revealed what true greatness is. Not the ability to rise above others, but the courage to lift them up. In their small apartment, Carmen Reyes framed a photo of Diego receiving his first academic honor at Stanford. Next to it, a certificate from the Chess Initiative already transforming young lives across the country. Achievements that no money could buy, no status could overshadow. Because the best revenge, as Diego discovered, isn't crushing your critics. It's building something so extraordinary that their opinions no longer matter. Victoria Whitman tried to make him a spectacle, but Diego Ramirez became a symbol. And that difference is what defines not only who wins the match, but who wins at life. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove true power doesn't come from privilege. It comes from turning obstacles into opportunities for greatness.